Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Rachel from PractiTest, and I'm very, very happy to be here with you. Welcome to the part one of the mini-series by Lena Nyström, which I will soon introduce and let her take over this presentation. But before I do that, I just want to say a couple of words about PractiTest and a few other things. So, okay. So first of all, for those of you who don't know PractiTest is an end-to-end test management platform for all testing types, manual, exploratory, automation, and it provides a unique data organization method, complete visibility, and improved productivity. According to our customers, as you can see here, we improve ROI, we improve time to market, and most importantly, the quality of their software. So please go ahead, check us out in our website or in application in other application ranking websites. In this mini-series, Lena is going to talk about deciphering alerts, making sense of what your software is saying. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but I will talk a little bit about Lena. She has been building software since 1999. She started as a developer, but she fell in love with testing. And she believes we should all strive to keep up to date and challenge ourselves, our assumptions, and the way things are done. I love it. I love that. From my side. Oh, one more thing that I forgot to say is that we have about PractiTest, we have a live training session, bi-weekly live training session. So please feel free to join one of our live training session. One of them is happening actually today later on, and the other one in 2 weeks' time. There you can learn anything you want about PractiTest. Going back to our, for the reason we came here today, Lena is going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then you're going to have time for your questions, 10 minutes or more, how many time we will need. In case you signed up for one of this mini-series parts, don't worry, you're automatically signed up to all of them. All of them will happen the same time. So the second part will be the same time next week, and the third part will be the same time in 2 weeks' time. We will share the recording with those of you who signed up. So if you miss one of them, you can always catch up before the next live session. So without further ado, Lena, please take over.
Thank you so much. Let me see if I can make this work then. And now you're on the other screen, so this will be even harder. I love standing on a stage, and now I have no idea who I'm talking to. But anyway, thank you so much, PractiTest, for having me here today. I've been itching to talk about this topic for a while, so this came as a perfect opportunity. We're going to talk about deciphering alerts, and alerts will be kind of like an umbrella term for error messages or warnings or information or even helper text that we use in software. And the reason I've been itching to talk about this is because people are complaining a lot about bad messaging. And as someone who has been on basically all sides of software, I've been building software, I've been teaching users how to use software, I've been writing requirements for building software, I've been testing software, I've been using lots and lots of softwares, and I've been managing teams building software. And I think I have some ideas of why this is so hard. And I hear people saying things like, did a human even write this? And that's been bugging me. So now I'll get 3 Wednesdays to talk about why this happens. So why is it so hard to tell us what actually happened? Why is it so hard to tell us how to fix whatever it was we did wrong? We're going to talk about that because messages tell a story. You heard a bit about me, so I'm going to skip past this really fast. I studied informatics, which is kind of like computer science, but softer, in the late 90s. Did about a decade as a developer, found testing, or rather, how can we improve quality? So a lot of my roles were like test lead, test manager, all the way up to building organizations around testing. In 2017, I switched to managing people. So building people, building teams, building organizations rather than software. And at the same time, I had the amazing opportunity to also start public speaking, which is why I'm here, because I love attention. I love being on a stage. So this is kind of like something that energizes me a lot. I am currently working as an engineering manager at Nordnet. Nordnet is a pan-Nordic digital platform for savings and investments, or an online bank, you could say. So this mini-series will be 3 parts. We will look into things like how do different parts of the tech stack deal with validations? How could we as testers guess where the error originated from? How can we use that to do better testing? Part 1, which is today, will be kind of an overview, an introduction to the problem, some different perspectives that make it challenging, a general overview as to why this is so hard. In part 2, we will look more into the different levels of the stack, the characteristics that come with them, and how we can use that information to write better bug reports or do better risk assessments. And then in part 3, we will look into even more detailed, specific examples of different types of errors that typically occur, so you can skill up as testers and use the things you learned in the first 2 sessions to uncover risk. So why is this so hard? We've been building software for since the 50s, lots and lots of years, and I'm not sure we've gotten that much better. In the year of 2023, when we can put rover on Mars, we can see black matter, we can shape the world we're in, we can use AI to write essays. Why do we still get this? Why do we get completely nonsensical messages that we as a user have to try and ignore, try again, or try to figure out what the problem was? I'm sure there are millions of reasons, but one perspective that I think is really important and make this hard is that the way we write messages, errors, warnings, informations, is always an act of balancing different requirements that clash. They have different demands. And we're going to go through them today, because with our communication with the users, we want to guide them to move through the system with as little friction as possible. We want to be able to debug problems easily. We want to avoid leaking information. We want to keep response times and performance. We want to have accurate data, available data. We want self-contained services. We want separation of concerns. We want all the things. So let's go through them and see why they might conflict with each other. So when it comes to guiding users, we want to help them get from A to B with as little problem as possible. And in order to do that, we typically do things like implement live or as close to live as possible validation. So things like marking mandatory fields, marking fields with different problems with red or icons, forcing users to pick values from a list instead of inputting values themselves, because then we'll have spelling mistakes and different types of writing a name or something, and we will have duplication. In the example here, you see a red marked password field with password required. This is a typical way of guiding our users. And they can be implemented as live, which you've probably seen if you have something like autocomplete or something. So while you type something in a field, it will automatically, every time you may change the input, it will validate the input. It could be implemented when you leave a field. It could be implemented when you submit a button. And all of these are there to guide our users to give us the information that we want in the format we want it, without them having to get back to the screen later in the process. So they can look like this. They could have information that states things like this password format is incorrect. Maybe they have a button that says, do you need help to continue doing this? All of these, while helpful, are like a tiny interruption to the users. This can be really annoying if they are too soon, too late, too often, too seldom. And important to know, they will at some point for some user fail, because they are just based on assumptions of what type of mistakes the users will make. But they are cheap, and for most of our users, since a big part of the world at least has fast networks, we don't anymore have demand for slim front ends like we did 20 years ago when I started building software. And they are way less destructive for the users than having to come back to a step, like 4 steps from now into a process. They are also very close to the user, so it's easy to make a message that feels understandable. It feels like a human has written them. Incorrect password format is typically something that most of us will understand. But on the other hand, we have security. And when we look at this from a security perspective, we want to give the user or a potential attacker as little information as possible. So we do not, for example, want to let someone know that an email is in use. So we don't want to say, yeah, this email is a user, but you've entered the wrong password, because that gives a vector that you can attack. So instead, you do something like this when you say you've entered the wrong email address or the password. We want to keep our assets safe, so we want to make sure that SQL injections, cross-site scripting, things like that, as you see in the password field here, is a script. And this particular application solves it by saying, oops, sorry, server is unreachable, which is not the actual problem, but it's a way of not telling an exploiter that we've caught on to them and we know that they're trying to use cross-site scripting. And we want to avoid leaking exploitative information. So we don't want, as I mentioned, to let someone know an email address is in use. We don't want to give all of this information about a password format, because if an attacker knows all of this about our password format, they can use that to figure out things like what encoding we're using or what security level we're at, making it easier to attack. And if you see the yellow field is an error message that gives an attacker a lot of information about database names and tables and fields. So this is something we definitely don't want to give if we look at it from a security perspective. Another perspective to take into consideration is accessibility, because while most of our users might be able to handle flashy animations and loud sounds and fancy pictures and all of those things, we need to consider that a larger part of our user group than we typically expect have different types of problems. So it could be things like they need to use a screen reader because they can't see as well as they would like. And when we look at screen reader requirements, we want things like using text instead of images. We want the alert to pop up, and then when they close the pop-up, they move to the field that has a problem. All of those things that screen readers like. And I really encourage you to try your software with screen readers sometimes. It can be hilarious or horrendous, depending on your viewpoint. We can also try to pick more accessible ways of validating data, because validation on submit is more accessible than the live validation I was talking about, for example. And we can think about our language, because understandable language is also an accessibility requirement. So don't have too many hard words or too complicated language in your messages. If we look at some more technical considerations, we want things like performance and scalability and reliability. So we do not want unnecessary network traffic. We don't want unnecessary input-output operations. We want to separate concerns. So the front end deals with front-end validation, back-end deals with back-end validation, and so forth. There's also a balance between, do we create a tailored error message for everything, which will create an insane amount of lines of code, unnecessary complexity, or do we strive for a more generic approach to error messages, which will make the code easier or simpler, smaller, but it will make the error messages harder to understand. And I also mentioned that we want separation of concerns. So imagine that you have an email format validation. You can validate that on the front end, on the back end, on the database, in the mail server, and you should probably, unless you really need to save network traffic. But also take into consideration that these 4 parts of the system will typically validate in different ways. So you can end up with some really strange results, but we'll get back to that in part 2. And since I used to be a developer, I love error messages that give me all the information. I want to know exactly what went wrong, where it went wrong, why it was wrong, and what we actually wanted it to be. So while this looks like a completely horrible error message for the typical user, it's goldmine for me. So what a lot of the more like off-the-shelf products do is they keep the message small, and then they give you some way of extracting more information that you can then send in, like an error issue report or something like that. So the send a frown button here will give me all of the information from the previous slide and send it to me, so I have all of that juicy information. So in like the last 15 minutes, I've gone through some different perspectives that makes talking to our users really complicated, because we need to balance different perspectives. We need to think about not giving the users too much information, because that will be confusing. It won't help them. But we also don't want the messages to be too vague, because then they will have absolutely no way of knowing what they did wrong and how to fix it. We also need to consider how helpful we are. How much do we help the user move through, say, checking out with little friction, helping them every step of the way, versus keeping the application secure, keeping our data secure. We need to balance things like, do we give all the bells and whistles and make everything super pretty and flashy? Or do we make sure that everyone can actually use it? And we need to consider things like, do we give every validation just in time, where it's easy to understand, it's fast, and it helps the users the most? Or do we want to make sure that we keep network traffic and separation of concerns tight? And these are just 4 conflicts between these. There are many, many more, and many more perspectives to take into consideration. So with that said, I hope you have a little bit more knowledge about why error messages aren't always as helpful as they could be. So in this part, we've covered introduction, different perspectives, a general overview. I will, in a short time, I will open for questions, and then in a week, we will dig a bit deeper, and we will look into what front-end validation, back-end validation, database validation, and integration validations can look like, because there are a lot of clues and different characteristics that we can learn and use. Thank you so much. I'm going to try to stop sharing now. There we go.
Hi, Lena. Here we have just someone saying thank you. I think everyone can say thank you.
You're welcome.
I mean, even in the from the side of the users, the things that you said were like, all right, that's true. I was like, and now I can't wait for you to continue. When you said this is the end of part 1, I'm like, no, don't stop, continue, solve my issues. But if someone has any questions, please feel free to ask. Let's give them another couple of seconds.
Yeah, I'll grab some more coffee, because I feel like I spoke without breathing for 20 minutes.
Well, I have a question here. Oh, yeah, it's not on the Q&A, but someone is writing to me. How do you decide which perspective to prioritize? It's a good one.
It depends on who you are. Hopefully, in like a true cross-functional agile team, you will decide it in the team. I hope you at least have the conversations. I would say a lot of time now compared to 20 years ago, it falls a lot on the designers or UX people. The security perspective has kind of fallen out of style. I very seldom hear developers talk about how to balance those things. They often go with whatever the designer chooses. But yeah, I would guess, like, what is the most important for this particular feature? If you're building embedded software, you need to think about things like lines of code and network traffic and memory and all those things. But if you're building Amazon, you probably don't have to care about those things, because you have all of the resources available. And then perhaps guiding the users is more important, because you want them to spend money. So that's the most important perspective in that case. But if you're building software for people who are like the Association for Blind People, you should probably think about accessibility first. So it depends is my horrible best answer.
No, it actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, there is no one answer fits all. It's like one solution fits all. It makes a lot of sense, especially if we're talking about users and products that are with different users and so on. Okay, thanks. Another question is there no way to cover them all?
Perfectly, no.
So it's always a compromise.
Yeah, I mean, you can do good enough on all of them, possibly, but you can't do perfect in all of them.
Okay.
Because perfect for guiding users would be giving them every piece of information about what they did wrong and how to fix it. But that would probably leak information that you don't want from a security perspective, and so forth.
So you can never win it all. Okay, terrific. Here we have another question from Martin Mann. He's asking, is there any sort of standards that I can get the developers to follow when creating meaningful messages?
Yes, but there are so many. It's no longer a standard. There are from the UX or design perspective, there are very good guidelines. I can send out the slides and some resources afterwards. Security-wise, I would look at the OWASP website. They have tons of information that's really easy to digest. Accessibility-wise, I would look at WCAG, the something accessibility. And I mean, debugging and such is, your developers probably know most about that. So there are standards, but none that like cover everything.
Okay. Great. I hope it answers your question. For those of you who still have questions, you can either type them now or you can join us for our next session, which is going to be next week, same time. Other than that, I want to say thank you to Lena again for opening our eyes and for this great session. I can't wait for the next one. And yeah, thank you all for joining.
Thank you.